I have rarely talked about myself on a personal level, especially on such a public forum as this. However, I do think that there is some value or relevance to actually revealing a bit more about my own past, my background, and so on. Because, well, I mean, as it pertains to music particularly, because I think that our influences, our musical influences, directly color who we are as musicians or songwriters and so on. And I thought it might be a kind of fun thing, sort of like an experiment, just to think about some of the influences from my early years, before I became a corporate shill, before I left the music and went into the working world, before ultimately returning to it, obviously. But in the early days, perhaps going back as far as 1978, I was deeply immersed in some new kinds of music that were just coming out and extremely adverse to some others. In the late 70s, particularly 1978, we had a combination of various types of genres that were sort of vying for supremacy. But disco, can you believe it, was really right up there. The Bee Gees, John Travolta and Olivia from the Grease movie soundtrack, The Village People, Boney M, Frankie Valli and the Commodores even, come on. Not to forget ABBA. But here is the things that stood out for me from that period. Jerry Rafferty and Baker Street, Kate Bush and Wuthering Heights, Queen and We Will Rock You. There was definitely some highlights. And definitely some classic sort of albums that stood the test of time. I mean, I think Van Halen's first album came out around that time as well. But for the most part, what I was being exposed to was the disco stuff, and that was, not awful, not by any means, just not for me. I was much more interested in David Bowie, Kate Bush, Mike Oldfield even. And, in particular, the album Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. That was very influential for me. I listened to that on a loop, night after night after night. The same, somewhat, not quite as much, but somewhat with Kate Bush and The Kick Inside. There were some great tracks on that, and I've always been a fan of hers since, I discovered Wuthering Heights on Top of the Pops in 1978 or whatever year it was. But certainly, she was also a songwriting influence because of her lyricism and exoticism, I suppose, in a way. She took risks. She broke boundaries. And Mike Oldfield, not from his single writing period where he, the Moonlight Shadow stuff, but from his albums. Tubular Bells was great, a revelation. Of course, not necessarily my favorite. In terms of his work, I would say Almadon over Tubular Bells. I love Almadon greatly. But there were a lot of great albums coming out around that period, and many of them influenced me, but none more so than, I would say, Bowie. And that's not to say I wasn't still a major fan of the Beatles. They've always been a huge influence and continue to be so. In fact, I specifically try to attempt to write narratives within my songs, much in the way that Paul McCartney does. If you think about songs like Obla Di, Obla Da, and, Desmond Has a Barrow in the Marketplace and so on. These songs carry let's say, a personification. They have characters. They have people that are named in them. In Penny Lane, there is a barber taking photographs of every head he's had the pleasure to have known, and so on. And I think his skill or craft at writing these little, almost little novelettes, in a sense, they're terrific, and I love them. And I've done it myself a couple of times, deliberately emulating his style, in a sense, or maybe not consciously, but certainly it seems to me that I'm doing so as well. There's a song I've got called In the Game, that's clearly, in my opinion at least, clearly influenced by McCartney.
The market trader hustles, he's gonna make the raid. He earns an honest dollar, but he's still little too late. And inside the checkout, her card has been declined. She'll step out tonight, though the streets are so unkind. I know you're scared and I know that life is tough, but to get a little slow, you gotta take your light off. I know it's hard
Of course, John Lennon's also a huge influence, both in his solo work as well as within the Beatles. But albums like Magical Mystery Tour, Sgt. Pepper's, Abbey Road, of course, I prize these very highly, and they have such great songs on them, and their color and invention and so on, it's just beyond belief. So of those, let's say, 4 currently identified influences, I would suggest that probably Bowie is the one who strikes me as the more core or key influence. David Bowie from Scary Monsters, from Heroes, Ziggy Stardust, and so on. And even Let's Dance, even during his disco period. Let's Dance was great. I mean, there's at least 3 or 4 great songs on that are just stupendous and have directly influenced my songwriting as well. So I definitely feel that the 1970s, particularly the late 70s, was a massive influence. And of course, I've only touched on just a few of the influences. I haven't mentioned Led Zeppelin, who I adore, or Black Sabbath, who I love. But I don't feel that they influenced my writing quite as much. None of them, I feel, I definitely don't have a Black Sabbath style song or something that I could point to and say that's something that, has clearly influenced me directly. But not to say that I don't love them, which I do. I'm very sad that Ozzy passed away. I was very sad when John Lennon passed away, and very sad when David Bowie passed away. It's a great tragedy of life that we don't live forever, but we have to leave the mark, the legacy. We have to leave the music. And if that's all that's going to be left of us, that's not really the worst thing.